you have not familiarized yourself with tactics, give me a second here. I've got to share my screen as usual. Second here. There it is. Okay. If you have not familiarized yourself with tactics, you're going to really enjoy this, because obviously you can get the book, because there's going to be a lot more than I can talk about tonight. So this discussion is contingent on something. And first of all, it's contingent on whether I pray first, because if I don't pray, we can't really do anything else. So let me pray first. Lord, we just thank you for our time tonight. And we pray, Lord God, you just bless this time, that this would be a really time of equipping and engaging, things about how to talk to people about you. And I pray you just bless each person here. And I pray, God, you be with us in our thoughts. And I pray the Holy Spirit would do his work in each one of us. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Okay. So this conversation tonight is contingent on whether you are interested in engaging people about the God question and about the claims of the Messiah. So if none of you are interested in that tonight, then this discussion topic is going to be kind of useless to you. So just a heads up. So I assume that many of you are on this call because you do care about that. Yes, Eric, that's why I'm taking the time to be here. So I'm just saying that, some people, might say to yourself, well, what good is this topic? Well, it has a lot of worth if you're obviously interested in talking to other people. This is the book that I'm talking about, that we're going to be looking at some of the material from this book. It's called Tactics. It's by Gregory Kokel. Actually, the 10th anniversary version is out, updated and expanded, because I bought this book back in 2000, I think 8 or 9, but now he's added all kinds of new material. Greg Kokel is the president of Stand to Reason. That's apologetics ministry. You can go online. They've got all kinds of stuff on there, on their website, Stand to Reason. He's been around a long time, but he's an excellent communicator, and this is a great book. It really has helped a lot of people in, talking about their faith with other people. So I highly recommend it. Of course, like I said, this is the newer version. Don't get the old one, get the newer one, updated and expanded. But I've seen him actually present on this material, and I actually did a apologetics presentation in front of him once, and he critiqued me. And so that was a lot of fun. That was like 10 years ago in Charlotte. Anyway, how time flies. But before we do anything else, there's one thing I need to mention. Did you know this? That's the good joke for tonight. When people ask you for a sign, there you go. Okay. All right. That's just to break the ice tonight. I know you guys are just like, that is the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I'm just going to use it everywhere. Okay. Bad joke time is over. All right. So here's the thing. If you don't agree with these first 3 points here, then you're not going to agree with the next 3 points. Some people may struggle with getting motivated to engage others. We may struggle with getting motivated to share our faith. We may struggle with motivated, period. But, something you have to agree on, the logic of the first 3 points is, if the New Testament's true, meaning that, the New Testament documents are reliable, and those documents show that Jesus is really who he is, that he is God incarnate. He rose from the dead, and he did all those miracles, and he has a speaking authority, and, he did all these things to show he's the Messiah. If you believe in the first 3 points, then the logic would follow on the following 3 on the bottom here, where it says, whatever Jesus teaches is true. Jesus taught where we are to go and make disciples of the nations. That can be anywhere you are. It doesn't mean you have to go off to Indonesia or China. You might do that, but you don't have to. So therefore, the conclusion is we should desire to go and make disciples of the nations. So if you do not agree with those points there, then you're not going to be very motivated to share your faith. Okay, so maybe you need to ponder those points a little more. I don't know. But, sometimes we don't understand the Matthew 28 passage. Jesus has been given all authority there. Then he gives it to his disciples, and he tells them to go and make disciples. And he's given us authority too. We're authorized and commissioned by him. Now, I think you all know that somebody can't become a disciple unless they first believe. So they first have to hear the good news, and they need to actually make a decision for the Messiah. They have to commit to him. And then, of course, afterwards, they enter into the process of discipleship. But if they don't hear about the Messiah, they have no idea who he is, and no one tells them, they can't make a decision. I mean, yes, God could reach them some other way. He does do that in some places, but the normative way he reaches others is through us, telling others, okay, through verbal proclamation, through verbal discussion, okay? I don't know hardly anybody that came to faith without somebody talking to them about the gospel, okay? So if you don't believe in these points, then you need to take a step back and email me sometime and say, I just don't even believe this, and therefore I don't know. Maybe that's why I'm not motivated at all to share my faith. Now, I'm also not a believer in guilting other believers into sharing their faith. I'm not trying to lay a guilt trip, because that's the wrong motivation to want to share your faith. You don't want to be guilted into it. You want to do it out of love for God and out of love for people, okay? So I'm not trying to do that tonight as well. So just make sure you're just trying to give some points here, okay? All right. Now, when we're doing discussions with other people, sometimes we're dialoguing with other people about God or the gospel, about spiritual questions or worldview issues. Sometimes you need to remember that, you know, Greg talks about this in his book, that we need to just give something to people they can think about, something that can't be ignored. Sometimes Greg Kokel talks about putting a pebble in their shoe. He uses that analogy. He talks about, you know, you don't have to put this giant rock in their shoe, just a little pebble, something that gets them thinking about, you know, the claims of what we're making, you know, the claims we're making, okay? And remember that you don't necessarily have to worry about the results. You know, we do our part, we share the faith, we answer questions, and we let God do the rest. We don't have to be so stressed out, you know, about, well, they didn't believe, or nothing happened there, there's no progress, and they don't care, and this is useless, and why am I learning apologetics? They didn't believe it, and that argument didn't work, and I tried this, and this didn't work. Well, the good news is that you are not the sower. God is the sower, right? So you don't have to worry about that. Go read Matthew 13 and study those different soils there, and it'll take a lot of stress off you and worrying about, you know, who believe, you know, why they don't believe or they do believe, and worrying about the results, okay? So just remember, the goal is to get them to think about something. That's really what you're trying to do. Maybe if you can just push the conversation a little further. Also, we want to remember what Daryl Bach said, you know, that time we talked to him about a month ago about the Ephesians 6 passage, about, you know, not wrestling against flesh and blood, you know, about the warfare passage in Ephesians 6. You know, he made an excellent point that people are not the enemy, right? They are the goal, but, you know, we need to understand that our battle is spiritual. And I think sometimes, like we talked about that night, we you know, look at it, it's something else is going on there. We think that, you know, the people are the battle or something else is the battle, but really our battle is spiritual, okay? So if you want to be effective in your talking to other people and outreach, I would suggest you pray a lot more. I suggest that you would spend a lot more time in prayer, asking for opportunities, praying for boldness. You know, there's times in Acts and Ephesians and elsewhere the apostles and Paul, they pray for boldness. And, you know, we've noticed we probably had a lot more success this term at our campus ministry because we have people praying for us regularly, praying for divine appointments, praying for God to bring those people into our pathway, okay? So remember, people are not the enemy, okay? Just a reminder there. Now, a couple other things before I go into tactics in a greater way. Let's remember that when it comes to what we're talking about, you know, sometimes with people, as I'll show in I Don't Have Faith to Be an Atheist as well in a minute, that we have to find out where people are at in their journey. We never can assume people believe in God, because obviously if you want to start with who Jesus is and start with the Bible, it can be hard when someone doesn't believe the Bible is an authority. And so sometimes what you have to do is start down in the bottom section here where it says foundation. See that foundation part, or the God part, the yellow part right here, the existence and attributes of God. Sometimes you have to start down in here and get people to even come to think about the God question, right? Before you jump to who Jesus is. Sometimes it just depends on who you're talking to, okay? if you deal with people who are agnostics, they don't really know if there's a God. We'll talk about that a little more. But remember, it just depends where people are at. Sometimes you can start with the New Testament, have them read the 4 Gospels. Obviously, if they're open to do that, that's great. And sometimes that's all it takes. But I'm saying sometimes you have to start down here at the bottom part and work your way up. It just depends. And that's why when you read a book like I Don't Have Faith to Be an Atheist, some of you are reading that right now, or you're familiar with it. The way that book is set up is that it starts out with truth. It starts out, these points all go in order, because if someone doesn't believe in truth, now you're going to have to deal with the truth issue. If someone doesn't believe that God exists, then you're going to have to deal with number 3, 3 and 4 here. Because if God exists, obviously miracles are possible. And then if miracles are possible, obviously you can start talking about Jesus and the resurrection and those things. So everything they lay on that book, each point builds on each other, okay? People may not need that stuff. You can maybe just talk about Jesus, say, who do you think Jesus is, and go right from there. That's fine. But I'm saying a lot of times in this culture, we're dealing with truth issues. We're dealing with God's existence. We're dealing with other issues. So it's not, as Frank said, it wasn't like it was back 50 years ago. You could just open the Bible sometimes to people and just preach the gospel out of the Bible. And then people say, well, the word is active and powerful, and the word will never come back void. That's true, but you need some more. You need some more things in your tool belt. Okay, this day and age, it's a different day. Okay, so you can read that book or look it up on Kindle. But those are the points. I'm not going to be teaching on these points. That's a whole other discussion. But anyway, okay. Now, a couple things are that as I said before, I said this in another meeting, that you're going to find a lot of people when you're talking to them. It's happening more and more these days, by the way. You see a lot of people making a lot of assertions. That means that they'll just say something, they'll spout something out or say something based on their opinion, or they think it's, a good point to make, but really they're just asserting things, meaning there's really no evidence for what they're saying. For example, if they say someone's racist, well, I would always say back to them, what's your evidence for that? I mean, that's a pretty strong claim. I mean, do you have any evidence that person's racist? Do you have any evidence that that person has shown that one people group's more superior than the other people group, or that people group should be shown special privileges or something? Or take like another silly one here. I think the disciples ate mushrooms and made up the Jesus story. Well, that's a pretty strong assertion there. There's really no evidence for that. So why, when someone says that to me, which has happened maybe twice in my life, but still, I'm just giving an example that people will assert things all the time. And you really just need to say to them, what's your evidence for your assertion? I mean, why are you making that assertion? Because they think they're making a factual claim, but really they're not. They're just making an assertion. Happens all the time. Happens in politics, happens in religious discussions, happens all the time. So that's just something you have to remember. You're talking to people, okay? Because someone will say, well, I think that, I think this, I think that. Well, they have to provide some good reasons for what they're saying. So, that gets into the issues that, if someone's going to make a claim about something, then the burden of proof is on them to give evidence for their view. I mean, I don't have any problem if someone says to me, well, you're making a claim God exists. You're making a claim Jesus rose from the dead. What's your evidence? I'm like, that's fine. Let's talk about it. I'm like, I'm making the claim. The burden of proof's on me to, give evidence for my view or for my position. Okay. But the same goes for the other person as well. Okay. So just remember that it's not your job to necessarily make them look, we're not trying to make them look dumb or trying to be arrogant or, trying to make it look like, oh, that's so stupid what you believe. We're just trying to get them to think through their position. Okay. And we'll talk about that, how we can do that. So the burden of proof falls on everybody. Okay. Now, one thing that I've noticed also, that actually Greg talks about in the book, is this issue of rhetoric. You'll notice some people are very good at rhetoric. They're very smooth with language. They're very persuasive. They're able to talk a certain way that's very persuasive. But remember, rhetoric is not a substitute for substance. Okay, I know Christopher Hitchens, the well-known atheist that died probably about 4 years ago. He debated Frank Turek a couple times, but he was a very famous atheist debater. He was excellent at rhetoric. I mean, he was a mastermind at rhetoric, the way he talked. But if you look at his arguments, the substance, there really wasn't anything there. If you watch his debates with Frank, sometimes he didn't even respond to Frank's points. He would just start off going off on a total tangent. He used all this rhetoric, but he didn't even address Frank's claims or didn't give any counter argument or anything. You can watch it online, their debates. So make sure that you remember that, because some people are absolutely mesmerized by powerful speakers that are persuasive and they use great rhetoric, but look at the substance of what they're saying. Always look at the substance, okay? I'm not really impressed with rhetoric. I mean, I know people can speak very persuasively, but the substance sometimes isn't there. So I'm tuning out their persuasion and their rhetoric if their substance isn't any good, okay? Happens, of course, in politics as well, as you know. Okay, now, let's go ahead and skip that for right now. Oh yeah, no, I want to go back to that, sorry. Okay, remember also that when someone gives an alternative explanation to something, remember that that's not necessarily refutation, okay? Just because you give an alternate explanation, you need to provide evidence for that alternative explanation, okay? And a lot of times some people will say, well, isn't it possible that this happened, or isn't it possible that that happened, right? For example, if you say the universe had a beginning and we think it needs a cause outside of time, space, and matter. The universe is set up for life, so we would be here. It's set up just right. And someone says, well, isn't it possible that there's many other universes and we just haven't discovered them yet, and we're just one of many and we got special? Well, is it possible there's other universes? It's possible, but we haven't found any evidence for any other universes. So just throwing out there a possibility really isn't an explanation, okay? And sometimes people will do that. They'll throw out these possibilities and think they're off the hook. It doesn't work that way, okay? We live, what everything that's possible isn't reasonable to believe. You know, I want the most reasonable explanation, not just what's possible. So you got to be aware of that. Some people do that, okay, when we're talking. At least it's happened to me in several occasions that I'll bring up a point, especially the universe thing. They like that one. Well, maybe there's other universes. It's possible, isn't it? Well, what if there are other universes? We still have to deal with our universe. This is one we live in. So what's the explanation for this universe, right? So let's stick to what we're talking about, okay? All right. And, you know, this happens with the resurrection. You know, when sometimes people try to come up with different explanations for the bodily resurrection of Jesus, you know, whatever explanation you come up with needs to explain all these points. You know, you've got to give the best explanation for the appearances of Jesus to many individuals and groups. You've got to give the best explanation for what happened to Paul, for the empty tomb, for what happened to James, for how our faith even got started in the first century without the resurrection didn't happen. You know, you've got to come up with an explanation for why the followers of Jesus started to worship God, or started to worship Jesus. That's a huge shift in their devotional practice. We talked about that in Rob Bowman's clip when he was here. So, you know, this is what I really try to do. I try to come up with the best explanation that answers all the data, okay, everything. That's the best explanation, okay? All right, now, this is where it's going to get really interesting. Okay, so the one thing that Greg Kokel does a great job of in tactics is something that we need to be using a lot in our evangelism. And that's the issue of asking questions, okay? You don't necessarily have to answer someone with a statement or give them some huge answer if you can just ask a question back. Questions are easier because it kind of shifts the burden of proof to the other person to make them think through what they're saying, okay? So I'm a big believer in questioning evangelism. That's the name of a book too by Randy Newman. He's a Jewish guy. But the point is that we really could do a lot better if we just asked a lot of questions. Let me give you an example. So I'll show some in a second, but it's true that Jesus was confrontational sometimes. You know, this passage here, he was pretty rough. You know, we know that the Pharisees get the worst rap of anybody of anybody within the Bible. And because of Jesus's relation to the Pharisees, more Christians have misunderstood those passages than practically anything else in the Bible, and it's led to more anti-Semitism in the history of our history of humanity, because people think that Jesus hates the Jews and he hates the Pharisees, and the Jews are all evil and wicked, and the Pharisees are the ideal hypocrites and legalists, and we don't want to be like them. So the point is that most of us don't take the time to study the relationship between Jesus and the Pharisees, what's going on there, which is a lot of polemical debate, which happens within Jewish circles at that time period. But we know that Jesus said some very polemical statements, and he was confrontational at times. When he dealt with his enemies, people look at the Pharisees as enemies, that's the way people look at it. He uses those woe statements, which is pretty serious. So he was not happy with them. But for the same token, I'm going to throw this out there, and it may throw everyone for a loop. Believe it or not, someone has written a book that Jesus was maybe a Pharisee. Oh, where are we going with this discussion tonight? That's not what this is about, but I will handle this when we do the Zoom call on Jesus and his Jewishness, or Jesus and Judaism. We'll do that eventually. No, there has been some talk that Jesus had more in common with the Pharisees than any other Jewish sect at that time. Sect, that's S-E-C-T. It is true, he did. He had more in common with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Essenes than anybody else. But he also had some disagreements with them. So actually, there has been a couple books written about Jesus was possibly a Pharisee. Now, of course, there's no hard evidence for that. But, we may want to take a step back and study the Jewish different sects at that time and compare them. And I think you'll see that Jesus actually probably had more in common with them than we thought he did. Okay, just for another topic for another time. But anyway, let's get back on track here. Okay, so remember that the gospel is confrontational by its nature. Okay, and Jesus was sometimes confrontational. We can be confrontational, but for the same token, we need to do it still with gentleness and respect. But I do believe speaking the truth in love. I've talked about that. I don't believe Jesus was Barney the dinosaur. We talked about that too. So we need to, know when to speak the truth in love. Okay. Now, when I say enemies, I don't, you're just supposed to love your enemies, but I'm just saying if you have somebody that you really disagree with, you may have to, be firm and speak the truth in love. Obviously, that happens. Okay. But one thing that Jesus did that we need to learn from, that Greg Kokel talks about, is he asked a lot of questions. Okay. And he asked 153 questions. It's recorded in the four Gospels, 153 questions. How about that? So that's what we want to learn about tonight. Some of these, some ways to ask some questions back, okay? Instead of necessarily just having to answer everyone, just ask a question back. And that is probably the best tactic we could take from tonight. Now, Paul, if you look at Paul's technique, Paul didn't ask a ton of questions. If you look at Paul's ministry, he mostly did a lot of messianic prophecy. He preached out of the Old Testament, talking about here, like Acts 17, he was using the scriptures, talking about, it said, he reasoned, explaining, giving evidence. He didn't ask a ton of questions. He kind of just took a straightforward approach and preached Old Testament prophecy and, of course, the resurrection. So just remember, Paul took a little different approach there, okay? All right. Now, there is something in Greg's book that we need to learn tonight, which is the biggest part of our discussion. That's called the Columbo Tactic and that technique. And that's where what I'm kind of talking about a little bit already. And what that means is that you don't need to always give a fact back. You can always ask a question. So you don't need to make a statement when a question will do the job. And so you can go on the offense in an inoffensive way, all right? So you can use carefully selected questions to advance the conversation. And one of the best things you can do is ask this bottom question, this bottom bullet point about what do you mean by that? That is probably the most, the basic thing, and also the most, one thing you should get out of this discussion tonight is to always ask, what do you mean by that? That's one of the things I do more than ever. Or else I'll say, let me ask you a question. What do you mean by that? I'll add that to it. So in the Columbo technique, you guys all saw the Columbo show. I know you watch in the 70s. I know you watch in the 90s, right? Okay, yes, Eric, I did. But in the Columbo Tactic, what you're trying to do is you're trying to determine what the other person believes. You're trying to get to the reason for their belief. In step 2, you're trying to use questions to point out weaknesses. And in some cases, you're trying to take the point to its conclusion. Sometimes that conclusion can be absurd. It just depends, okay? So asking the question back is helping to determine what the person's really saying, what they really believe. You're asking them to clarify, okay? And it's helping them to think through it. It's helping you to understand. And then, of course, you're going to ask some reasons why they believe that. And then you're going to ask some questions back, and then you're going to try to, show them that conclusion, just the conclusion's kind of absurd, okay? All right. Now, so we're going to look at some examples of the Columbo technique, and we're going to look at some common things people say and how this works, okay? All right. So first thing we want to do is determine what the person believes, and this is how we ask questions back. Let me give you some, I have some examples here that are really good. So let's give an example. Someone says, they say this all the time, all religions are basically the same. You can always ask back things like, these are questions we ask back. You don't need to give them an answer. You don't just need to say, no, they're not the same. They're not the same, and you're an idiot. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. No, you wouldn't say that anyway. Say some of you would, but you can ask questions back and say, why do you believe this? Why do you think, what way are they basically the same? And why do you think the similarities are more important than the differences? Do you think Jesus taught all religions are equal? And you get that little analogy on the bottom of the aspirin. But, if you just ask them some of these questions, you'd be surprised. They really may not even know. I was talking about this question with someone 2 days ago, and I told them in Islam, Jesus never died. He never died on a cross. They don't believe Jesus ever died on the Roman crucifixion stake. Well, we believe he did. So right away, they didn't know that. You see, and so therefore they wow, that's a radical difference. Maybe they're not that similar, right? Islam and Christianity or whatever. So you just ask some questions back and try to clarify what they're really saying. So that's something. This is just one small example. Now another example is that I've got another one right here. I've got another one. Example, like someone might say, you're just being intolerant. You can always just ask questions back what they mean by intolerant. Is it intolerant or intolerant for listening to views that differ than yours? Are you saying I'm intolerant because I don't accept what you believe? Is that how you treat all people? Do they have to believe what you believe? And therefore, if they don't, they're intolerant? Really? So that's what you want to start asking these kinds of questions, okay? You don't need to get defensive and be like, no, you're intolerant. No, you're intolerant. No, you are. No, you are. No, I wouldn't recommend that. Just ask them questions right back. It takes the tense, it makes the conversation less tense, and it gets them to think through what they're really saying. I had just a story. I had 2 gay students last week come up to me at my table. I have to say they're gay because I have to explain this, what happened. So I was going over the definition of tolerance with them for about 10 minutes, and they agreed with me by the time we were done that true tolerance can accept the individual, but can still disagree with what they believe and still respect the individual. And they agreed with that. I said, do I have to agree with you about sexuality in order for you to accept me as a person? They said, no, you're right. We should be able to get along as people and share that common humanity, share that humanity, and just realize we have differences about this, but we don't want to just look at it like I'm not going to accept you anymore, just because you don't agree with my view on sexuality. So, I got them to see that we did agree on the same definition of tolerance. Tolerance is accepting the person, but not necessarily what they believe. So that was something we had to go over, and it actually went over quite well. Let's look at another one here. Or, like, you shouldn't force your views on me. Question back, how am I forcing my views on you? Do you respect diverse points of view, or do you condemn others for convictions that differ from your own? So, that's something you can always ask back. Just basic questions. Really, really important. Now, let me give you another one that comes up a lot. I have this one on my own. Sometimes, people might ask you if you're a creationist. they say, are you actually a creationist? And, a lot of times I'll ask back to them, I'll say, what do you mean by creationist? And then if someone says to me, do you believe in evolution? I'll ask back to them, what do you mean by evolution? Or what do you mean by that? Sometimes, I may jump to the gospel and then, jump back to that later. But the point is that a lot of times what I'll say is that, do you mean that, am I a creationist instead of being like a naturalist or materialist? Are you saying that if I don't believe like a material world is all there is, I don't believe the natural world is all there is that what you mean by creationist? Well, in that case, yes, I'm a creationist. I believe that there's a God outside of the natural world who created this world and steps into the world and does things. I don't believe nature is all there is. I don't believe the material world is all there is. I don't think we're just matter in motion. I haven't seen any convincing evidence that says we're really just matter in motion. So that's something I always ask back to them. What do they mean by creationist? Because I think once you walk them through it, what the alternatives are, then they'll begin to see, oh, I never thought of that. For example, I might say to them, are you trying to ask me if I believe I'm an accident of nature? Is that what you mean? Instead of, you say I'm a creationist. I don't believe I'm an accident of nature. I don't believe in this quote here. The man is alone, the universe is unfeeling immensity out of which he emerged by chance. Chance alone is the source of every innovation of all creation, the biosphere. Pure chance, absolutely free but blind, is at the very root of evolution. So if that's what someone believes, and you're asking me if I believe something that's different than that, the answer is yes. I believe that there is something outside the natural world. I don't believe that chance can account for everything, and blind chance, of course, doesn't account for everything. So sometimes you just have to put it back on them to get them to define what they mean. Ask them that question. Same thing with evolution. When they ask me if I believe in evolution, I always say, what kind of evolution? What are you talking about? Evolution has different definitions. Do you mean like number 1 here, number 2, number 3, number 4? Which one? I'd say 9 out of 10 times they've never even thought about it. I can tell you from experiences. So sometimes I get them to make them define it, and then we'll talk about it, okay? So that's something that's very helpful, at least in my conversations with people, versus you going on the defense and saying, well, you have to believe in creation, evolution. You can't be, it has to be one or the other. Well, if you haven't even defined what you mean by creationist or evolutionist, that's already kind of a discussion that's gotten off to the wrong start, if you ask me. Because if I believed in number one here, or number 2 as well, that's compatible with our faith. Okay, we all believe in change over time, history of nature, any sequence of events in nature. Everyone believes that. Everyone believes in changes in the frequencies in the gene pool. That's not really that controversial. Even young Earth creationists believe in natural selection, random mutations happen. But we don't believe it happens without any guidance or design. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense to us because we don't believe in blind chance. Now, number 4 is kind of controversial, obviously. But, the point is that it really helps to define, what we're talking about, okay? Let me give you another one. Here's a good one. So people say, I don't know if there's a God. They're agnostic. They'll say, I just don't know if we can know. I don't know if we can know. I don't know how we would know. What I say to them? I say, well, how would you know if God exists? Like, to know something means you have knowledge, right? And how should God give people knowledge he is real? I put it back on them and I ask them, make them answer that question. If you're God and you want people to know who you are, how should you give knowledge of yourself to humanity? What should you do? I guarantee you many times they don't even know. And so I'm not trying to be snarky. I'm just saying that you really can ask them that question, put it back on them, and make them think through that, okay? Because if God has to give us knowledge of himself, that's how people know, right? He's going to have to do something. You could, we can look in the world of nature to see if God's, shown up in the world of nature, whether there's knowledge of God in the cause and effect relationships we observe in the natural world. That means you don't need the Bible to know that, by the way. You can know there's a creator without the Bible. Or maybe we'll look into history and see if God's spoken into history somewhere, see if he's spoken and shown up. Or maybe we'll look at science. Is there any evidence in the sciences for God? Well, I think there is. Some people think science is off limits for God. They think they're incompatible. That's a whole debate about intelligent design. Or maybe we just look at things in reality and ask what the best explanation is, for, why people seem to fight for others and human rights and dignity and value, why they have moral obligations and moral duties, why humans have consciousness, why humans have, a DNA code that's like an instruction manual. What's the best explanation for that? Or maybe we look at pragmatic arguments. Maybe something works for someone. Maybe they tried a certain faith and it works out in their lives. Or maybe they've had a religious experience. Or they think God answers the big questions, the existential questions, okay? But the point is that I'm trying to get them to get to this point, is that, I've said this before. If you want to know something about somebody, if I want knowledge of anyone in this call tonight, you're going to have to communicate. You're going to have to either do something. You're going to email me, call me, send in text, verbally speak. And that's how we receive that communication. I could get to know that person, know what they expect of me, right? Just like job requirements. Someone sends you a list of responsibilities. That's kind of like the analogy with revelation. If God wants to communicate to humanity, he's got to pick a medium to communicate, right? And that's what we believe, that God has done that through the world of nature and through the world of history in the person of Jesus, right? So we should be able to receive that communication if we're open and willing, okay? Of course, some people aren't. They're closed off. All right. Let's go back to some other Columbo tactics. So let's say someone says it's not rational to believe in God because there is no proof or evidence. Of course, you can just ask back, what do you mean by God? What do you mean? What kind of God do you reject? Or, what specifically is irrational about believing in God? And of course, how do you define proof or evidence? That's a big question I always ask. What do you mean by evidence? Most people aren't even sure sometimes, so very basic. Just ask some of these questions back to them. Or, another one, the Bible's been changed over the years. So I've heard this a lot over the years. 90% of the time, I ask back, how do you think it's been altered? How much of it has to be true for you to consider it? What's the evidence you have it has been changed? Well, especially with Muslims, this has come up. They say the Bible has been changed. I've asked them, always asked them, what's your evidence it's been changed? You have anything to show me? They don't. Many times they don't. So that's something you always want to ask back. What's your evidence for that? And how do you know it's been changed? In what ways has it been changed? Something I always ask, okay? Another one, there is no God. Once again, what do you mean by God? It's a good question to ask back. And, is that an opinion, or you think something's objectively true? What's your evidence there is no God? And what do you mean by God? So basic things, basic questions to ask back. A few more here. How about this one? How could God exist when there's so much evil in the world? You can ask back things like, what is the conflict that what in your mind is the conflict? What do you mean by evil? Could God have a morally justifiable reason for the way things are? Like Frank said last week, though, I find sometimes people are emotionally hurt, sometimes by suffering evil. So sometimes a lot of philosophical or big apologetic answers won't work because they're hurt emotionally. So in that case, it's just going to take being a friend and listening to them, right? Okay. Let's go to this one. Science has shown there's no God. I've heard this one before. What I always ask back is, what do you mean by science? Because science only studies the natural and physical world. So by definition, God would transcend the physical and natural world. So how would science ever show there's no God if it's not even set up to find God, right? It won't even study anything outside the physical material or natural world. Now, you can't look in the natural world and know there's God. I mean, I agree. You can look at the natural world. I'm just saying many scientists won't even allow God in the story or in the mix, right? The other thing I asked them is, what kind of science? Is it biology, physics, chemistry, cosmology? How did you arrive at this conclusion? There's all kinds of branches of science. It's not just like science. I mean, which one? I know plenty of people that are believers that are biologists, physicists, chemists, so that's just nonsense. So you always want to ask those questions back. What about the fetus? Maybe a human being, but it's not a person. Question back, what is the difference? If it is a human being, then why is an abortion murdering a human being? There's a lot of questions you'd ask back with the abortion debate. We're not going to spend all our time on that tonight. How about this one? You know, reincarnation, by the way, is getting very popular these days. A lot of people believe in reincarnation. I'm noticing that, but there isn't any evidence for it. But some people might say reincarnation was taken out of the Bible. I had someone kind of say something close to this a few weeks ago. You know, what's the evidence for that? You know, what's historical evidence for that? You know, how were those words removed, you know, in the early Bible copies we have, in the early copies? Many times they don't know. A lot of times they're just quoting things off the internet, okay? Just a few more here. You know, this one, the Bible is just a bunch of myths and fables. Questions back again, why do you believe that? You know, do you have any ancient examples of myths and fables that look like the Christian texts? What professional historians hold that view? Do you have a background in textual criticism or history or historical? You know, are you kind of like an historian? I mean, how do you really know that? And what do you mean by myth? And what do you mean by fables? If they say Genesis is just myth, you say, why is it? What do you believe? What do you mean by myth? You get them to define what they mean. Okay, really, really important. Yeah, you're intolerant and arrogant. Of course, you can ask back, how am I being intolerant and arrogant? Or Jesus was just a good man, prophet, but not God. You could ask them, you know, how could Jesus be a good man but be mistaken about his own identity and purpose? And how could Jesus be good if he lied when he claimed to be God and wasn't? That one doesn't work very far. This is a common one. The Bible can't be taken seriously because it's written by men and men make mistakes. You know, some things you can ask back, is there a reason you think the Bible's less truthful or reliable than other books you own? Why do you think people always make mistakes in what they write? Why do you do you find any truth in books that are on your bookshelves? You know, what is, you know, is that what the Bible claims for itself? Have you actually read the Bible? That's a good question to ask also. If they ever read the Bible, that's always, there's no guarantee people make these claims have actually ever read the Bible. Common question here, one of the most common questions I've had in the course of my life: what caused God? Always ask them back, in my opinion, what do you mean by God? You know, what do they mean by God when they ask what caused God? Because if they mean the God of the Bible, well, the God of the Bible is a self-existent, uncaused cause. The God of the Bible doesn't have any parts. He's not put together. He doesn't have any materiality. You know, he doesn't have a beginning. So there's nothing physical about the God of the Bible. Nothing that shows that he's like a table or a chair or a car that was put together by somebody else. And so they're making a category mistake. They're putting God in the category of things that are made and put together, when you have another category over here, the things that are unmade, and they think those are the same thing. But how would they know anything about God, what God's like, his nature, unless God shows us, right? We don't know anything what God's nature is like unless he shows us, and he has shown us through nature and history. So they're just misunderstanding what God is like because they just don't know. They haven't looked into it. I wouldn't respond back with that. I wouldn't respond back to that by saying, well, nothing caused God. You got to give them a little, you know, got to go a little deeper than that. Very important. Okay, so something else that Greg Koukl talks about in tactics, and that's where we want to take the claims to their absurd conclusion. That means that we take the other person's view for the sake of the argument, but we press the point to its logical conclusion, okay? So these are some examples of that. Like sometimes you might hear people say, you know, people's behavior is okay, you know, as long as they're not hurting anyone. I've heard that a lot. That, you know, that can be a problem. You know, you can give some examples like a peeping Tom thing here. But, you know, I'm sure some of you can think of some behaviors that maybe they're not, it looks like they're not hurting anybody, but they can be hurting themselves, right? You know, there's some behaviors we could talk about that. But the point is that you got to take it to its logical conclusion. That's what you want to walk people through. Here's another one. You know, someone says there are no absolute morals, like the statements section here. There are no absolute morals. Well, I could turn around and say, can I go ahead and steal your stereo? Or, you know, morals are an invention of culture. You know, then the question becomes, then why do you think Hitler could murder the Jews in the Holocaust? if morals are just an invention of culture. They were just, German culture was doing what they thought was right. They invented their own morality and decided to commit genocide upon the Jewish people. Or else we're governed by a natural process of evolution. Question back then, can the strong oppress the weak? Those are things you have to press it to its logical conclusion. Or, you shouldn't, here's some other ones here, number 6 and 7. You shouldn't force your views on me. Question back, or point out that why are you forcing your views on me about not forcing your views on people? Why you said I shouldn't force my views on you, but you're forcing your views on me that I shouldn't force my views on anyone else. Or else another one, you shouldn't judge me. Why are you judging me for judging? Right? That's the self-defeating claim. You're so judgmental. Well, why are you judging me then? You're judging me for being judgmental. It sounds kind of silly, but it's true. I mean, that's, the person is being judgmental. They're being judgmental of you for judging others. Or, God wouldn't have done it that way. They think, well, God should have done it a different way. Well, why can't an omnipotent, omniscient being choose to do things that are inefficient? Where does the Bible say that God didn't do it that way? Some people might say the universe has wasted space. That's an example of that. Well, you should have done it differently. Well, we found out now that that wasted space is there for a reason, as these physicists have shown that. So, to say that, God doesn't do it a certain way, what way, you wouldn't even know what way it should be unless you have an order to begin with. So you have to have something there to go off of. So what way should God have done it? That's something to ask back. A couple more here. Or how about this one? Two people who love each other should be allowed to marry. Of course, this debate was out there 4 or 5 years ago, before that behavior was legalized. I'm not going to get into that debate because that's another topic for another time. But the point is that, some people said this a lot. Two people who love each other should be allowed to marry. Well, of course, the response back was, well, if love is the only criteria, then I guess anyone can, get married, because obviously there was all kinds of people out there that love each other. I mean, brothers and sisters love each other and they wanted to be married. And then we got in this debate about other people wanting to be married because the criteria was love. If love is all that's needed, then I guess there's all kinds of people that could constitute a marriage and could be called a marriage, okay? And that came up a lot in that debate. How about this one? If God created everything, why did he create AIDS, influenza, and a lot of these other diseases? Something you might want to ask back, of course, is why do you think God even created these diseases? Are these diseases described at the beginning of creation? The answer is no, they're not. Or what about the native in Africa who's never heard the gospel? Heard that a lot. So, that's something I always say, that God obviously knows everybody that's out there. He has knowledge of who knows what, and God is fair and he won't make any mistakes in judgment. So, and I think people are judged according to what they know. And so how will you know how they'll be judged? And so, that's just kind of a question to divert the attention off themselves. The question is, what have you done with the knowledge you have, right? Okay, now, some questions we also want to ask, like we said last week. Great question to ask, like Frank Turek said, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Always a great question to ask. If you believe something that isn't true, would you want to know? Do you have intellectual issues or moral issues with Christianity? Always ask them maybe, what is the issue they have with the faith? Why are they rejecting it? Is it a moral issue? Is it an intellectual issue? Is it an emotional issue? And then maybe, what about God? What would be one question you'd like to ask God if God does exist? That can always be something you may want to ask. We got to remember, though, like Frank said last week, and that's the issue of two things that were kind of the overview of I don't have faith to be an atheist. Two things we're trying to establish: that God exists, he is the God of the Bible, and that Jesus rose from the dead, game over. Okay? If Jesus rose from the dead, the God of the Bible is the one true God. Okay? All other gods are false. All the other claims about different gods are false. Okay? Because Jesus gives evidence that bears witness to the one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay? So if you can establish those two things, then you're on the right track. But the point is, though, you may have to start with God's existence first, but the point is that sometimes if you want to jump to the resurrection, which we'll do another meeting on the resurrection, but if you can establish that Jesus rose from the dead, that can be enough for people. I know some people come to faith through just hearing evidence for the resurrection, and that was enough. They came to believe Jesus is who he is through the resurrection. That was it. And so that kind of got them on track to believing, and everything else. That was kind of like the domino. Okay, it started everything. So the goal is to always ask questions. Okay, I really think one of the best things about tactics and talking to people is to ask questions, because one thing I will mention is one of the number one things I ask people nowadays is, do you care? I mean, are you a truth seeker? Do you care about whether it's true? Do you care about whether what we're saying to you is true, that Jesus is who he is, that God exists, that Jesus will forgive your sins? Do you care? Are you interested? Are you on a truth quest or a happiness quest, like Frank said? Those questions will help people you'll get to the heart of the issue, what's really going on there, okay? So those are some of the questions I asked back, but I think the best thing about tactics, like I said, is asking the right questions and taking things to their logical conclusion. So having said that, I am going to unmute and people, oops, I have to mute again. So we're going to talk now. Who wants to talk about something? Go ahead. I'm going to open up more time to talk about these things tonight. Who thinks asking questions is a better way to do evangelism? Anybody? Who wants to talk? Hold on. I got to mute you. Okay. Who thinks asking questions is a better way to do evangelism?
I do.
Yay. I've got one. Anybody else? Nobody else. Everyone else disagrees, Vi. We're done.
Okay. Remember when we had our Jewish evangelism seminar here, and we used Kennedy's explosion, his explosion program, witnessing, and we would go door to door, take a survey, and we asked 2 diagnostic questions.
Yes.
If you were to die tonight, do you have the assurance that you would be in heaven? And the second one, and if you were, not that you will die tonight, and if you did go to heaven, what would you say if God asked, why should I let you in? It's kind of simplistic, but it's a springboard,
Yeah, no, I agree.
Zeroing in on where somebody is. It's just like a friend of mine was telling me that she lived next door to a neighbor 5 years, and she didn't know whether she was a believer or not. And she invited her over for coffee, and we sat down, and I just asked her those 2 questions. And we had an opportunity, I had an opportunity to share the gospel with her. So questions I think it's wonderful. I think, yes.
Yeah, and especially also asking questions back, when they're making claims like I've talked about tonight, because I just think a lot of times most people ask those questions or make statements and they don't really know what they're saying sometimes. I mean, not that you're trying to show them they're stupid or anything. They just don't, you're trying to walk them through it, get them to think through it by asking a question back. I've had people ask me what caused God. I mean, I've probably heard that 150 times over the last, 10 to 15 years on campus. I mean, well, the universe has a cause, and what caused God? I mean, they always act like that's like the go-to question. And my first response is, what do you mean by God when you say that? Like, how are you defining God? Is God like, and they don't even know. I mean, most of the times they're like, well, I mean, just God would have a cause. And like, well, how would you know what God is? What is God? What is he? Is he like a physical being, or does he have parts? Was he put together? That's what you're saying when you're saying what caused God. He was put together by something else. How do you know he's put together by something else if you don't even know what God is? You only know what God is if God shows us what he is. And God's only shown us what he is through creation and through history. So game over. There's no way they could even know that. I mean, there's some more sophisticated answers to that, but the point is that just, trying to get into that and asking some questions back. So yeah.
Opens the door.
Well, you're not trying to beat them over the head like they're dumb. It's just, they just don't they just repeat a lot of the same questions they've heard before out in culture, right? Just like when Muslims say, well, they'll make a claim like, well, Jesus never said he was God. We talked about this. We've had 4 or 5 Zoom calls. We talked about this with scholars. They'll make that claim, and then I'll say, well, why do you believe that? I said, tell me, why do you believe that? Like, what is that? Why would he say I'm God all the time? Like, why would he even make that claim everywhere he walked? Like, I am God, I am God, I am God, I am God, I am God. Well, why? He's a Jewish man in a Jewish culture. Like, Jews were taught not to worship idols. I mean, you think he's really going to be so explicit just to say like that? There's a reason he cloaked it in a certain language, the way he said it. So, sometimes you just have to keep making them think through what they're saying, you know what I mean? What they're asking. There's all kinds of examples, but anybody else? Does everyone think asking questions are good, or what do you think?
Yeah. I definitely think asking questions is the best way to go because it engages. My only challenge with that, I'm reading Tactics. I'm at chapter 4, and at chapter 4, you're sort of commissioned to rejig your strategy and go out and ask, what do you mean? What do you mean a lot, right? So that you can kind of get used to doing that. My only concern is that I may come off as being a seeker of their knowledge or looking for what they have and when I have the truth. You know what I mean? Have you ever encountered that yourself? Like, you
No.
come off as being, no?
No, I haven't come across that way, because I think that by asking questions, I've never had them look at me that way. I mean, you are seeking in a way to know what they're saying, but you're not seeking because you want to believe what they believe. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I'm not seeking to ask, I'm just asking them to get clarification, to get them to think through what they're saying.
Yeah.
Now, wait, Dwayne, let me say one more thing. So when you're asking the question, you also can you're also trying to gently guide them and get them, you also can throw in some other things, like you're trying to guide them as they're moving along the conversation. You know what I mean? Like, it's not so much like you have to completely shut your mouth. I mean, you can listen, but I'm saying you can, if they're trying to explain it, you know what I mean? You're saying, I know what they're trying to say, but you're like, okay, do you mean this? Like, oh, you mean that? I guess no, I haven't had that happen, but go ahead.
So you're trying to emphasize, you're more trying to clarify rather than get information, because it's interesting, because part of the tactic is to get information and to clarify, right?
Right.
I'm not saying I feel like I'm doing that. I'm saying they may perceive that I'm doing that I'm trying to understand their belief in reincarnation, perhaps. And I get it. It's actually a good thing, because then they kind of want to talk more. But I feel like I'm going to get into that kind of a pitfall in a way. I don't know. Maybe it won't happen, but that's where I'm at right now.
Well, like, for example, yesterday I was talking to a guy that believed in reincarnation, and he came up to our table and he was like, he was really proud, and he's like, I've studied world religions, I've studied all them for years, and I know a lot of things people don't know. And he kept insisting that reincarnation was the same thing as resurrection. And I kept trying to, after a while, I think maybe we asked a couple questions, but then I said, then I started stating some evidence. Well, that's not really correct, and I just kept saying, first of all, it's like, why, how'd you arrive to that conclusion? But he just kept insisting. And then I started to tell him, that's not the same. I started to get evidence why resurrection is not reincarnation, but he really wasn't listening. He just kept constantly, saying, no, they're the same. He just literally was so proud that he wasn't teachable, or he wasn't listening to us in any way. So basically that reached the point where we weren't getting anywhere with him. He just wouldn't listen. He wasn't teachable. He wouldn't ask, so I kind of was like, this isn't really productive at all. I'm like, I'm not getting anywhere. We're not getting anywhere. We spent 20 minutes and then I was like, this conversation wasn't going anywhere. It just kind of was a dead end. Doesn't mean I failed. It just means that I could see that he was not listening at all. He just kept talking, saying the same thing over and over and over. You could tell him over and over the evidence of resurrection was not reincarnation. He simply would not listen. And people like that, you have to just kind of let go. But No, so I mean, asking questions, I suppose, or Dwayne, I suppose it could come across that way, but I'm trying to think of another example. We talked to 6 Mormons about 2 weeks ago, all at once, and we were asking them a lot of questions about what they believed about this and this and this. And I suppose they might have looked at this, hey, maybe they are seeking to become a Mormon. You know what I mean? They're asking us questions about Mormon doctrine. Now, of course, deep in my heart, I know I wasn't going to ever be a Mormon because I know enough about Mormonism. I never be a Mormon. But at one point I said to them, they were saying so many things that sounded similar to what we believed about Jesus. They believe he's the savior. They believe we need to accept him in our lives. We have that common belief. I said to them, well, why do I need to be a Mormon then? Like, why do I need to be Mormon? Why are you out walking over campus trying to convert people to Mormonism? If I already believe in Jesus, he's in my life, I'm born again, and I'm going to heaven, you think I'm saved. So why do I need to be a Mormon? I just flat out said that, you know what I mean? Like as a question, and let them explain it to me why. And then they gave me a reason. I had to be a Mormon. I had to have a better, what was it? Not so much they didn't think I wasn't saved. They thought I'd have a better, I'd reach a greater goal, like heaven, a greater level. There was a level I had to reach. It was going to be better if I was a Mormon. But, you know, I just came out and said that. I was like, why should I be Mormon? So yeah. Anyway.
Yep. Okay.
I don't know if that answers it or not. I don't know.
No, it does. It does answer it. I just think I speak to some people that I think that are going to be challenging, and I'll probably come to that dead end that you kind of described, where it's like, oh, we're not getting anywhere. And
yeah. The other thing,
you know,
the other thing is though, Dwayne, it's not like, this isn't some sort of legalistic method, like you have to always ask questions. No, I'm saying you should know when it's time to make a claim and say something instead of a question, like that guy yesterday, the reincarnation. Like eventually I just said, that's actually not true. Resurrection is not reincarnation, right? I'm done asking questions now for him. Now I need to just tell him why why that belief is wrong, right?
Right. Yeah.
You know that sometimes we just have to do that.
Of course.
So I don't have any problem with that at all. Of course not. I mean, you have to do that sometimes, but maybe just we ask questions starting out and see how the conversation progresses. But we don't want to come across like, Dwayne, I will agree, we don't want to come across like, oh, are they trying to avoid what I'm saying by just asking questions and trying to steer the discussion in another way, like a rabbit trail? That's not what we're trying to do. You know what I mean? We're not trying to avoid it at all. We're just trying to get them to think through what they're saying. If you watch Turk's clips from last week, his college experiences, when he has clips of him talking to students, probably 85% of the time when the person comes up the microphone in front of 500 people and asks a question, he has to ask them a question back because they really don't even know what they're saying sometimes. Sometimes he has to get them to ask the question to get them to think through what they're really asking. And he has to do it because the whole thing's going to go off, it's going to be derailed if he doesn't do it. So I just think it's a good tactic, but you don't have to follow it legalistically, right? Yeah.
I noticed that Frank will also rephrase their question to put it in one of the categories. So they'll ask the question and he'll say, "Oh, that's a moral question, right?"
Right.
And answer it because he's got it all packaged, and he'll come back and he's right. He's just kind of phrasing it and repurposing, repackaging the question to fit what the answer that they really need to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. It is rephrasing the question. You're right. That's another way of doing it too. I agree 100%. Yeah. So, anyway, yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts or anything?
Hey, Eric, one thing I would say is we're talking about asking questions, which I 100% agree upon. I think the person that's trying to witness to, once you get through that first line of questioning and asking questions back, we have to be current in our words. So we can't, I don't want to assume that all of us on the call and everybody that's trying to witness and be apologetic towards others, we can't assume that. We have to assume that there's something behind those questions. How do you, further cement or further plant and water that the gospel is true? So the point I'm trying to make is that we have to be current in our words.
What do you think about the morality of something?
Hold on a minute.
Yeah, the point I was trying to make is we have to be current in Scripture. So we have to know, after those questions leave, we have to be able to feed them Scripture. The other point is, instead of, and I've heard this said, and it probably isn't meant this way, but in our conversation tonight, it's like, all right, well, I think I've gotten to as far as I can get to with this person. The conversation's not going anywhere. First Corinthians chapter 3, I think it's 6-8. I watered, Apollos, I planted, Apollos watered, but God got the increase. Even though it seems like that conversation might not be going anywhere, we know that the Holy Spirit is in charge and something got planted in that person. Someone else might see it grow up and blossom. We might not see it, but still you have to have those conversations to plant that seed.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's right. That's what I said at the beginning. We don't have to worry about the soils, right? From Matthew 13. And we never need to be discouraged about that. When I started doing evangelism years ago, I get real discouraged. And then I started studying the parable of the sower. And I'm like, hallelujah. I do not need to be worried about the results.
Amen.
So that just did set me free, that text. So anyway.
And I like how you said, too, and this should give us some comfort when we do go out and witness. The people aren't the enemy, right?
Right.
It's that spirit that runs to and fro that's the enemy. We can stand there in confidence and witness to them, knowing that they're not the enemy. We're just dealing with scripture and trying to feed them scripture.
Right. I mean, I always say feed them scripture, but like I said, with me, with the apologetics thing, I've got to have a lot of things in my tool belt to be ready, so I can jump outside scripture. We talk about science, or talk about history, all those things. I'm trying to answer their questions the best of my ability, of course, weaving in the gospel always.
Yeah.
And then I feel that if I've shared the good news and I've answered the questions to the best of my ability with the power of the Holy Spirit, then I'm done. I can't do anything else. I've done.
I agree.
That's it. So, but I'll make mistakes. I still make mistakes, and sometimes you learn, and you say, well, I should have, maybe talked about this. I could have taken that conversation in that direction. I made, but that's how you learn. You got to learn, start somewhere. So, but anyway. Okay. Anybody else have any other comments, questions?
Okay, I have one.
Sam, God bless you. How are you?
I'm taking on Dwight, talking about if we keep asking questions, seems like we're trying to learn from the other person, seeking their position. But I think it may not be a bad idea, because if we're talking about we're open-minded, and I'm open for evidence. If your evidence support your evidence support the other person's argument, I'm open to reconsider my position. But it just so far hasn't been the other argument hasn't been presenting enough evidence to make me reconsider my position. So I think I think we should have that attitude. We are seeking, it's not like mine is mine. If you start winning the argument, I get away from it. No. We should be open.
Right. We shouldn't be afraid of the truth. I mean, if our faith is really true, I mean, what we're saying is really true, we shouldn't be afraid of dealing with questions against it or positions against it. I mean, we've been answering some of the same questions for 2,000 years. But like I said, I agree. I mean, there's nothing wrong with listening to another position. If a Muslim says to me that Jesus didn't die on a cross, which they have said to me that, well, we don't believe he died. I'm like, well, if I say, what's your evidence for it? I'll hear it. They want to give it to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to be very persuasive, because the Quran's written 700 years or 600 to 700 years after the New Testament. So already that's a red flag to me. And it's written by a guy that didn't know any of the apostles, any of the eyewitnesses in the first century. So it's already, it's evidentially speaking, it's just not even remotely comparable. So, how am I supposed to take that claim seriously? But they're like, well, the Quran's perfect. It's from God. It's perfect. It can't be wrong. I'm like that. That just leads to all kinds of issues. So I'm just saying, that I'm open to hear it. Like I agree, Sam, but.
Well, actually, I don't think the Quran actually said that Jesus didn't die. It's just based on their tradition. There's some other writing commentary on the Quran, I think. And I have to go back and check somebody who knows the Quran a little bit better than I do. But I don't think the Quran support that evidence.
Well, they say it's somebody else. that
Yeah.
died. It wasn't Jesus. They made someone look like Jesus, right? The disciples were deceived. It wasn't.
Well,
It
what I
really
mean
wasn't
is not
Jesus.
in the Quran, it's in the commentary or traditions that comment on.
No. Oh, you mean in the Hadith?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some
No,
other thing.
it's in the Quran. I could
Right?
find the verse. Yeah, I could find
Oh,
it.
okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we should
Um,
share that.
I've had
Okay.
Muslim friends to tell me that that the instant before Jesus died, God switched Jesus with Judas Iscariot, and he's the one who actually died. Even though it still looked like Jesus, it was Judas. Yeah, Judas Iscariot who died.
right. That's right. Hold on. I'll put the verse up here where it is. I have it right here. Give me a second. It's from here. I have it right here. I'm going to type it in the chat room. Just a second. Here it is right here. Go into the chat room right now. Hello, chatty. Where are you? Okay, chat room. There we go. All right, I'm going to type it right now. Chat. I'm posting it to everyone. Okay. Boom. There it is. There's the verse. Surah 4 right there. Yeah, see, it says there they made another one made to resemble him. You know, that's what it's, yeah. So that way, that's like, Frank said last week, if you can watch that clip on the Islamic dilemma, that passage by that clip by David Wood, which we talked about last week. I don't know if any of you looked it up. I posted the link last week, but that's very helpful. But, Muslims, I find that talking to Muslims, honestly, I mean, my experience, we talked to hundreds of them at Columbus State, the community college here. There's so much pressure on them sociologically to believe in Jesus that even if they have evidence, they can't. They just won't believe it because there's too much pressure on them. We had a girl that came to faith 2 summers ago, and she really had a sincere conversion, I believe. But then she got pressure on her from her parents, and she disappeared. She's gone. We haven't seen her ever since. She's not on the campus anymore. She vanished. Those kinds of things happen, and it's very, very hard for Muslims. And Judaism, sometimes you can believe in Jesus if you come from a secular background or maybe a conservative background, but with your Orthodox, you get a hardcore Orthodox family or something, they may just disown you and say that you're dead to them. Now, they won't have you killed, but, you can be disowned. So it's very serious. So anyway.
Well, that
okay.
has happened in my experience too. That an Orthodox boy that we know who prayed to receive Jesus was kidnapped by the Jewish community, and what they do is they try to reprogram them, and he just disappeared.
Right. Yeah, it's Michael Brown had a story. He went to meet a Jewish believer in Europe somewhere at a hotel. This guy was asking questions. He wanted to meet with Michael privately at a hotel somewhere in Europe. And I think when the guy got out of the car in front of the hotel, oh no, he got out to go to the hotel, a bunch of Orthodox Jews came up and kidnapped him and threw him in a car, and the guy vanished. He was gone. Michael's told me that story. So it's just, those kinds of things happen. So just don't take it for granted that you can believe. It's harder. It's easier for a Gentile, I would say, in some cases, than it is for an Orthodox Jewish person or Muslim. That's for sure. Anybody else have any other thoughts or comments about anything about the?
I have a question.
Yeah, Ian, go ahead.
Okay. How would you adapt this to arguing on a text or blog? How would you adapt these tactics to that, if at all?
Online, well, I have done some online discussions. I don't do as much as I used to. You can still ask the questions. You can ask questions like just type it out. Just say, hey, what do you, so-and-so, you say this. What do you mean by that? I mean, I've asked questions like on my blog when I've had discussions with people in the past. I've asked clarifying questions. So, I don't see anything, what reason why you can't.
Well, on a blog, you might be hours different in responding to each other.
Well, that's true, but that's okay. But you know what? That's the nature of internet evangelism. That's just the way it is. I've had that where I responded or asked a question. It's taken 2 days for the person to get back to me. But that's just the way it is. Now, if you're having a chat room, that's different, right? You're going back and forth, you know,
Yeah.
back and forth, back and forth. But I think blogs, yeah, that's just the nature of the beast. Facebook is another one
Right.
where I've seen that happen, where people get in these big discussions. They ask someone a question, then the person doesn't respond for a day or so. You know what I mean?
I
So it's
just
just the
wondered if because of that kind of texting format, you would include a lot more information or not in things.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed over the years when I did have internet discussions, some people would always post things, right? Like a link. Like, you know, if you want to find out about this, read this. And then, you know, sometimes, you know, it got to the point where I'm like, you know, I don't have time to read 50 articles. You know, I don't have time, you know, but I mean, I say sometimes, can you summarize what you're saying, you know, but it just depends on the person. So, but yeah, I have no problem asking questions on that format. But you know, I got to tell you, Michael Brown said, he said the internet is like a harvest. It's waiting for, you know, so many people coming to faith online. They're getting information online. So the internet is a huge place for discussions if you have the patience for it and the time. You know, if you can do it. I just, for me, I did it a little bit for a few years off and on. It just got really tedious for me, and I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with it. But for the same token, other people are very good at it, and I commend them. But I'm outside mostly on campus outside, so I just don't have time to sit on my computer mostly during the day. But I think people that can do it, you should do it if you can do it. Yeah, and I'll probably be doing it one day. I'm sure a lot more, but
I
just for now.
just thought this was a medium whereby you could get under the defenses raised by all kinds of.
Okay, so here's the problem with the medium. Here's the problem with the internet. You can't pick up on tone, right? So someone could say something to you and the tone may come across like, oh, they're really mad, or now they're being arrogant, or now they're being really forceful. I mean, it's very hard sometimes to really get a read on the tone. I had that happen last week with somebody. I wasn't debating an atheist, I was debating with another believer about politics or something, unfortunately, which is stupid. But and I noticed the tone was, he finally emailed me. He said, why don't we talk about this on a video chat or by phone? Because he actually lives locally in my city. Because we just weren't getting anywhere online. We were just going around circles and it just wasn't going anywhere. So, you know, you really have a hard time picking up on tone, Ian, don't you think, online?
Yeah, yeah. Though you can sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, but I would agree. It really helps if you can videos, you know, if you do like if I do a YouTube clip and someone comments on it, then they've heard what I'm saying verbally. Now we can try to talk about it or something, but it just depends. But no, I agree. The internet's a great place to do outreach. There's all kinds of information there if you have the time. So
Okay, thank you.
Yep. God bless you in those efforts too. Anybody else?
It's Brent.
Hey, Eric. I definitely thank you for taking this time out with the book Tactics. I'm actually probably after this call going to go see if this is actually on my Amazon that I can listen to the audio version of it.
Yeah.
But just the whole thing I do, and that's probably one of my favorite ways of evangelism is even just starting off with a question. I can be out to eat and just wind up with ask the waiter or the waitress like, hey, I'm doing a study on da-da-da-da, and I just got a question for you.
Right.
And I think the advantage that brings is because it's so inviting. And I think that's what was beneficial for Paul when you talked about in Acts 17 in Athens. It's inviting. It's allowing someone to be able to have a voice to say something that they believe in. And so it kind of works a lot in a lot of different contexts. And so I just wanted to share that thought. Don't really have a question so much, but just
well, you know, like I showed you, when we do our whiteboard questions on campus, we always have a question of the day. That's how we start out everything. We just have a question like, are you a good person? Yes, no, or I don't know. Does God exist? Yes, no, or I don't know. Does, you know, are you good enough to go to heaven? Yes, no, I don't know. Do you believe in the afterlife? Yes, no, I don't know. See, I mean, that's the best way to talk, just start off with people versus the statement, a biblical verse, like, you know, like a statement, you know, so.
Yeah. It just opens it up for that why.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Good point. Brent, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks because like the Columbo method really resonates with me.
Okay.
Like from a background perspective, my dad was a big proponent of the Socratic method. He was
Socratic
like trying
method,
to,
yeah.
Socratic method. He was trying to drum that in at an early age. So hearing you call it the Columbo method, like really.
Well,
drives it
Greg
home.
calls it that. Greg Kokel. Yeah, he was the one.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah,
repeating.
my dad would say like I'm just a humble accountant before he would like skewer someone. So I guess don't take it too far, right? Like the idea is humility as opposed to false humility in love. Anyways, I'm just going off on tangent.
No, I agree. You have to. The Socratic method is something that, yeah, Socratic dialogue. There's books on that too. But no, Greg. Is everyone familiar with like Columbo? The show. I mean, that's what he's doing it from. He's calling from the show Columbo, Peter Falk. You know, Peter Falk passed away, I think, like 6 or 7 years ago. But I used to watch the show. You can watch reruns. But he always would ask questions. You know, he'd say, "What do you mean by that?" He would, you know, of course, he'd say, "Excuse me, just one more question." You know, he'd do that a lot in the show. If anyone watched the show, so that's what he kind of came up with that Columbo tactic using Columbo. But there's a book called Questioning Evangelism. I mentioned that book, Questioning Evangelism by Randy Newman. He does a similar thing in his book. You can get that book called Questioning Evangelism. So he's a Jewish believer, but you can look it up online. So very similar. Yeah. No. So no. Anyway, anybody else? Comments or thoughts?
Eric, I know I've asked you about this before. I just can't remember.
Oh gosh, here we go again. What? I'm just kidding.
About somebody bringing up the question about dinosaurs, which really has nothing to do with the Bible, but how do you?
Yes, it does. It's all people think about. Go ahead. I watched Jurassic Park. What's the problem? I've seen movies 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Go ahead.
Where do you go with that?
The Bible talking about dinosaurs? Well, the debate is whether the Bible mentions dinosaurs. Answers in Genesis would say yes. You can go to their website and look up, what does the Bible teach about dinosaurs? Old Earth creationists would probably maybe, there's that passage about Leviathan in that one passage in Job or something. I think it talks about that, but there's not anything, I wouldn't say there's a ton of explicit statements about the dinosaurs in the Bible. But that gets into the age of the earth. It gets into, the death before the fall. It gets into that thing, but I don't really know a ton of explicit passages that talk about dinosaurs. It doesn't mean that there wasn't any dinosaurs, of course. It's not what we're saying. Of course there were dinosaurs. There's too much evidence for dinosaurs, but just because the Bible doesn't mention it doesn't mean that it's they didn't exist necessarily. Where were they? When Adam and Eve were there, were they like, there's other parts of the world. I mean, could they be all around that area? I don't know. Whether there's other parts they're in, I don't know. I mean, so I'd say you can take a couple approaches. You can either go the Answers in Genesis route, look it up what they say, or else go the Reasons to Believe route, what Hugh Ross and Old Earth creationists say. Just type in Reasons to Believe dinosaurs or Answers in Genesis dinosaurs. But one way or the other, what is that? I mean, what relevance does that have to, I'm not saying you're saying this, what relevance does that really have to whether, specifically whether Jesus died and rose from the dead? So I think what you need to do is steer the conversation first towards the gospel, and get into the issue of who is Jesus, he died and rise from the dead. Now, if that person's an atheist, I would also say, the first issue is whether God created, whether the universe is created. Now, are you trying to tell me if the Bible doesn't specifically address dinosaurs, like there's no God? Is that what you're saying? Or that the Bible's false? Or what are you trying to say, right? You're trying to say that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, or, you know what I mean? Like, is it just a red herring? What's the point of that question? You know what I mean? And so, because there's answers on either side. You can either go the Answers in Genesis route or go the Old Earth creationist route. But neither one of them, both of them, of course, believe dinosaurs existed. It's just a question of what the Bible teaches about it. And that's going to be an interpretive issue, right? Interpretive issue. Scientifically, we know dinosaurs existed too. So I don't think it needs to be a defeater like for God's existence or whether Jesus rose from the dead, right? You know what I mean? It's not going to change whether God exists or whether Jesus rose from the dead. So I guess that's what I try to steer the conversation towards. Yeah, that's the first issue, is whether God exists and whether Jesus rose from the dead. But there aren't a lot of explicit statements in Scripture about dinosaurs. No, I don't see a tons of. There's not like a passage like, and Adam looked over and there's a T-Rex right there. You know what I mean? And the T-Rex was like right over his head, like about to eat him or something, you know, like he's always eating somebody in Jurassic Park. So no, I don't know a ton of passages about dinosaurs really. They talk about the Leviathan passage in Job, but you don't want to never want to make the text say something it doesn't say either, right? You don't want to try to make the Bible say something it doesn't really say or doesn't address. And there's nothing wrong with saying the Bible doesn't always address everything, doesn't mention every single thing. If it's not there, it's not there. Call it a day. So what? Doesn't mean dinosaurs didn't exist. Yes, Sam.
Yeah, to go along with it, the Bible doesn't address everything.
Right.
There's a lot of things the Bible didn't address, but I think the most important thing, the Bible's focus is on the purpose, the meaning, and significance of who are we? Who are we, and what is our identity? Why are we here on earth? Then where we come from, where we're going. The Bible doesn't address most of the other things. That's where the focus is.
Well, it does address where we come from. That's important, right?
That's
Where
what I
we're
mean.
going.
Those are the kind of things the Bible's addressing. Where we come from, who are we, where we going. But dinosaur, the Bible, it's not part of the original audience discussion. They don't even care.
Right. It's like Brent just wrote in the chat room, you know, about John 21:25, you know, that passage into John, you know, Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them are written down, I suppose that even the whole book would not contain them. So, you know, there's things Jesus did that aren't even written down there. So you have to go with what this is what we have. This is the text we have and what it does say and does. You don't want to make it say something it doesn't say and try to make it do more than it's doing, right? So it's like someone argued, who would someone argue? Well, anyway, there's something last week someone was talking about something else about the Bible, and I just said, I don't think we know, we don't know. There's not enough there to go off of. So just call it a day and just say there's not enough information to make a definite conclusion about that point. And that's just the way
we can segue into, if we say Bible is more focusing on the purpose, meaning, and significance, then you talk about where do we come from. Now we're talking. I'm going to give the conversation into, do we know who we are? Do you know why are you talking to me now? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so Julie, if the person's an atheist, I would just really go to the issue of, why don't you think there's a God? Like, why you don't believe in a creator? Why? You know, why do you think nature is all there is? Why do you believe nature is all there is and nature made you and that's all there is? And if so, why do you believe that? Get them back to the creator question, you know, then, you know, you can also ask them if Christianity is true, would you be a Christian? You can ask them that. Because dinosaurs will not impact whether Jesus died and rose from the dead. I mean, that's not going to change that claim at all. Now, I don't want to say you can try to avoid it. You can look up answers in Genesis and look up reasons to believe and get some more answers there and maybe email them some points, but it's certainly not going to be a deal breaker the way I see it.
I think in this case, it might have served as a distraction between old versus new earth thinking.
Right.
And so, but at the end of the day, that, you know, where does that lead as far as why we're here and our purpose? And just like Sam said, the resurrection, going back to things that really matter to determine the evidence and whether we think there is enough evidence.
Well, you know what, even if the earth was old and there's millions and millions of years, which evolutionists, you know, seem to need to make their point, let's say there are millions and millions of years. You know, obviously young earth creationists say that's heresy, but you know, let's say there are, it's not getting rid of a creator, and it's still problems with evolution. There's still problems with the entire evolutionary model, even if there are millions and millions of years. I mean, there's so many issues there. To give it more time, I mean, it just doesn't work. There's all kinds of issues. So I just think that's a side distraction to get around the point of whether there's a creator. The first issue is whether there's a creator. Who are we? Where do we come from? Are we made by a creator? Are we just chance accidents? You know, just chance accidents that got here through, you know, time and chance. So
I'd
Yeah, I'll
say
take a couple.
yep.
Yeah, go ahead. What's that?
Oh, I was just going to add, and you don't have to say anything. I was just going to say
I won't then.
a couple other distractions, you know, as far as genocide and the Crusades and some of those things too. They're, you know.
Well, those questions can be answered. Genocide in the Bible or the Crusades. I mean, those things can be answered, but what is that? You need to get them. You need to ask them. Those are that's the time where I would say to them, okay, if Christianity is true, would you become a Christian? Would you become a follower of Jesus if Jesus really died and rose from the dead? That's what I want to know right now. Ask them that flat out. See what they say, and then say, yeah, I'm really interested, you know, but I'm hung up on this issue with genocide in the Bible or the Crusades. Well, there's been good answers to both of those things for a long time too, and we can go through that if you're interested. But are you a truth seeker? Are you really seeking truth? Or are you just like don't care? And this is like a deterrent. It's like a side issue, which you're trying to avoid the issue. You try to get to the heart issue, the heart of the issue, what's really going on. But in some cases, if they're sincere, then you can go through with them. But if they're not sincere, then you're kind of wasting your time. So you have to ask them that. I would say if it's really true, would you commit to follow? Because the truth of the matter is, if to be a follower of Jesus, you have to believe he is the Son of God who died and rose from the dead. So do you believe that's true or false, that statement? And then go from there. So I can give you resources on the genocide issue and the other one.
I have Julie and Eric.
Bye.
I have a wonderful book. It's called In the Beginning, Compelling Evidence for Creation, the Flood. It's the go-to book for Christian scientists. Dr. Walt Brown was the director of the Creation Institute here in Phoenix. I just looked up dinosaurs. Oh, he's got chapters and chapters on dinosaurs.
Thank you so much. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, there's resources there. Like I said, it's just, like I said, I mean, how much, you want to go into. Yeah, there's all kinds of books on creation. And, like I said, you can look up Answers in Genesis or Reasons to Believe too. I mean, they have stuff on dinosaurs. They're the two go-to creation websites. I mean, one's Old Earth and one's Young Earth. Read both their reviews. You know what I mean? That's what I think you should do.
Thank you, Eric.
No problem. Okay, anybody else? A couple more? I got to get going here. I got to be somewhere. But anybody else? Maybe one or two more quickly?
Can you tell me again the author of I Don't Have Faith to Be an Atheist?
Yeah, that was Frank Turek, Turek. He was on last week. Turek. Turek. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Yeah, he was on this slide set here. I had a slide there with his book, but you can look it up on Amazon. Just look up Frank Turek, Turek. His website's called crossexamine.org. Crossexamine.org. Yeah. Okay, anybody else? Maybe one more?
Yeah, I just had a little statement about at our church we do evangelism too, and when we in the class we also do role plays.
Yes.
So when we go out evangelizing, we will run into a lot of different, other religion and stuff. So we'll be like preparing ourselves,
right,
for the, for what they probably would say. And we also do like scripture memorization based on the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But we also do, like you said, study outside the Bible in case people say they don't believe in God.
Right.
So when you was talking about how you was talking to some people that believe in you say reincarnation or
yeah.
So we did like role plays on reincarnation. So we would ask them, so what was you before this life?
Right.
If they say they believe in reincarnation, we'll ask them the question, so what was you in the last life? You know?
Right.
And then they'll look at you and look like, I don't know.
So or what do you want to come back as, right? What do you want to come back as? Like a dog or a butterfly? Yeah, Carla, who was on this call here, she did that yesterday too with the guy about reincarnation. She was asking those kinds of questions like, what if you lived a bad life, right? Because reincarnation is based on how you live too. If you did something really bad, you're going to come back something that's not good. I mean, it impacts your future reincarnated state, so how would you know? So anyway, yeah, I agree that role playing is really helpful. I agree. We used to do that in evangelism class. We did some role.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what we do at our church. We do that before we goes out. We go out like on certain weekends of the month, but we only do it up until a certain time of the year, and then the rest of our time is in class studying. It's a whole lot we just do in the classroom, and our outreach ministry is called Champs, meaning that Christian have a mission to preach salvation. That's what Champs is.
Champs.
So have you heard? Yeah, that's the name of our outreach is Champs,
Okay.
but it means Christian has a mission to
Oh, I
preach
see.
salvation.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, so our leader, he just was telling us about the tactics, and I